A young man has a passion for art and politics. He strolls the streets, admiring the majestic buildings, and is entranced by the beautiful landscapes of the city in which he lives. He is ambitious as ever and rigorously studies paintings, architecture, opera, and government. He has the aspiration to one day be a famous artist. So, where did Adolf Hitler go wrong? Ambition is one of mankind's greatest and yet most dangerous traits. It has led to some of the most significant inventions, discoveries, and stories of personal triumph. Yet it has also led to some of the most destructive and horrendous downfalls the world has ever known. Possessing ambition is a pertinent quality. However, it is how one goes about achieving their ambitious desires that determines the true character of an individual, and whether the outcome is positive or negative. Adolf Hitler, one of the most ambitious people to ever live, was consumed by his sociopathic rage, leading to arguably the most disastrous and negative outcome in the history of humanity. Hitler's ambition directly contributed to his own downfall and early demise. It is true that in the short term, Hitler's ambition transformed him from a man rooted in poverty. In December of 1909, freezing and half starved, he moved into a homeless shelter. He ate at a soup kitchen operated by the nuns from a nearby convent, to one of the most recognizable figures of the time. His ambition and drive for power catapulted him from a homeless person with nothing to his name to the Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Even though he had much success in achieving his goal of becoming Chancellor, and he became one of the most powerful and influential leaders of all time, this still can't be seen as his ambition leading to a positive outcome, because his reign of terror led to his infamy rather than fame. He is not known as a great leader, such as Churchill, Roosevelt, or Trudeau, but rather as a tyrant and a scar on German society. Furthermore, the battle and bloodshed of World War II, which was caused by the actions of none other than Hitler himself, led to the German leader witnessing his empire fall, his allies flee, and his country's destruction, and drove him to take his own life. However, the disaster created by Hitler's ambition did not even come to an end with his death. Today, there are 5 descendants of Adolf Hitler who are still alive. They didn't sign a pact, but what they did is, they talked among themselves, talked about the burden they've had in the background of their lives, and decided that none of them would marry and none of them would have children. And that's a pact they've kept to this day. The name Hitler is associated with such horrors and travesty that it is not hard to imagine that Hitler's descendants carry an immense weight on their shoulders. So much so that they have agreed to intentionally kill the Hitler bloodline by never marrying and never having kids. A magnificent sacrifice. Since Hitler's dream was to have a 1,000-year Reich, it is clearly a negative outcome for him personally that not only did he lose the war, but that he disgraced his family name to the point where his lineage is purposely being terminated. Not only did the events set in motion by Hitler's ambition have a negative outcome for himself, but for Germany as a whole as well. It can be argued that before Germany's defeat, Hitler led the country to be the most powerful it had ever been, with constant expansion of territory and ever-growing influence on European society. However, all of that is negated by the end result of Hitler's reign of terror, which is the utter demolition of Germany and all its major cities. Toward the end of the war, when the Allies were closing in on Germany, almost every single German city was being absolutely destroyed. The Allied fighter jets carpet-bombed the cities, killing millions. In 1943, among the many of Germany's cities that were being bombed, Dresden and Hamburg were 2 major cities that were hit incredibly hard. In Dresden, February 1943, 70% of the city's buildings were destroyed. Over 150,000 civilians were killed in 2 nights. In Hamburg, August 1943, 60% of the city's buildings were destroyed. Approximately 100,000 civilians were killed. With all the bombing and desolation of the country, Germany's total death count after the war was 7,393,000, the second most out of all countries involved in the war. The death count equaled 10.6% of the total German population. Out of all those deaths, 1,860,000 of them were civilian casualties, the third most out of all countries involved in the war. Aside from all the turmoil and devastation inflicted upon Germany, its civilian population, and not to mention its economy, one of the worst and most long-lasting negative effects on the country is its reputation. Germany's history dates back thousands of years, and the Nazi rule over the country was just a short span from the early 1930s to 1945. And yet, Germany will forever be associated with Nazism and the Holocaust. Even now, as they are economically strong and a flourishing country in European society, there are still people in the world who would first think of Hitler and the Nazis when asked about Germany. Thus, the brutal and horrendous war caused by Hitler and his vaulting ambition had a worse outcome for Germany than Hitler or anyone else could have ever imagined. In addition to Germany, the awful effects sprung on by Hitler's ambition were felt heavily across the world. It is true that the atrocities being carried out by the Nazis caused the rest of the world to put aside their differences and unite to put an end to Germany's tyranny in Europe. The United Nations were even a result of World War II, as the Allied countries convened and decided that they must do something to never again allow such horrors to take place. However, this still cannot be perceived as Hitler's ambition leading to a positive outcome because of the millions killed in the war and the incredible suffering endured. Many of the Allied countries, as well as other countries that were invaded by Germany, suffered incredible loss and grief. The Soviet Union was one of the greatest sufferers of World War II. Their total death count was 23,100,000, the most of all countries involved in the war. They also had the most military and civilian deaths in the entire war, 10,700,000 and 12,400,000 respectively. Many other countries, such as Poland, Yugoslavia, Romania, Hungary, the United Kingdom, and even the US and Canada, suffered many casualties due to the war started by Hitler's Nazi regime. Similarly to Germany towards the end of the war, many European countries had their cities and villages invaded, bombed, and reduced to rubble throughout the war during Germany's aggressive invasion of the majority of Europe. During Germany's invasion of France, they reached all the way to Paris, destroying everything in their path. Across Europe, the Germans reached Moscow during their invasion of the USSR and flattened other small countries along the way. Aside from all the fighting and chaos set in motion by Hitler and his army, perhaps the most disgusting and volatile outcome of all was the Holocaust. The Holocaust was Hitler's plan to punish and exterminate the Jewish population of Europe. It began with ghettos, where Jews were all kept together in overcrowded establishments with horrible living conditions, and often died of either disease or starvation. Once Germany began losing the war, Hitler decided that there needed to be a quicker way of dealing with the Jews, which is how the final solution came to be. Concentration camps were built, mainly in Germany and Poland, with the intention of murdering as many Jews as possible before the war was over. Certain camps built in Poland, including Auschwitz, which was arguably the worst of all, had gas chambers installed in them, where mass amounts of Jews would be killed by toxic gas. The gas chambers at Auschwitz were capable of fitting 700 to 800 Jews in one chamber, and they would be killed within 3 to 15 minutes of being in the chamber. There were a total of approximately 6 million Jews brutally and inhumanely killed in the Holocaust. In Poland alone, there were roughly 3 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, with essentially 100% of the Jewish population in Poland being wiped out. These surreal and unthinkable terrors that the rest of Europe and the world had to face demonstrate one of the terrible outcomes caused by Adolf Hitler's ambitious and twisted desires. It should never be forgotten that ambition is a very desirable trait. Without ambition, the world would not be where it is today, and much would be different. Ambition is what drives people to achieve their goals and strive for greatness. It is simply when one's morals and ethics are compromised that they allow their ambition to take control of their judgment and lives. It is in this case in which ambition can lead a person down the wrong path and result in a negative outcome. After rejection from an arts academy, Adolf Hitler's ambition for power and greatness, combined with his anti-Semitism, turned him into one of the most vicious and sinister leaders of mankind. His unquenchable thirst for power led to a very negative outcome for himself, the country of Germany, and the rest of the world.